one, so I think can end up to being a very interesting. And that's with two studios kind of running into legal troubles with their respective games. So the first thing that was announced is that Friday the 13th, the game that has definitely earned some ire, despite having a pretty interesting Kickstarter success, has been having nothing but trouble these last few months with issues of hacking, poor support, connectivity issues, and so on. So it was officially announced this past week that basically any plans to keep developing the game are kaput. And it's a very interesting case. Let's see if I can pull up the news piece about it. So this is weird. So there is a legal dispute regarding who owns the actual rights to Friday the 13th. So it started according to Gamasutra, in 2016, when the screenwriter, the original one, Victor Miller, claimed he wasn't employed when he wrote the movie. So he took legal action to reclaim ownership. And when did that Kickstarter for the game go up? That's interesting. Hold on, time to do a little bit of digging here. Because if they started the Kickstarter knowing that the legal dispute was going on, that would be very disingenuous. Okay, so the Kickstarter began in 2015. So at least they have some grounds for not knowing about it. So, and then it hit them according in 2017. And because the lawsuit is ongoing, they don't know when it's going to run out, they can't add any new content to the game that would get in the way of that. And
it's time to pivot. They have to do a kind of a takeoff. They can just call it something like Thursday the 12th or something.
Or Saturday the 15th. Or Saturday the 14th there. But it looks like because the lawsuit is preventing them from basically using the rights that they got the IP for, or be able to get sort of the digital rights for it, without any new DLC for any kind of multiplayer ongoing game, it's basically dead in the water. So they may still work on like server issues and hacks, but basically the Kickstarter game is done. And as Algordo mentioned in chat, they've been working on another game at the same time, which actually caused another bit of a problem earlier this year, or even late 2017, because the fans didn't understand, or they didn't like the idea that the team was kind of split between two games. And it's not looking good for Gun Media, because of course I'm sure you're well aware, Rob, and I'm sure for people watching, that this kind of stigma follows through onto whatever other projects you work on.
Yeah, you pretty much have to rebrand at that point. And even then, if word gets out that you're just another name for that other company. Although I was just reading about Steam's recent dismissal of Active Shooter, that they found, or at least this is what they're reporting, that the developer has been a troll on Steam before, and they uncovered that he had gone under different names and done other things, and so they kicked him out specifically under those reasons. And it just makes me realize that if a big company like Steam doesn't realize, even after Active Shooter's been released and gotten the so much attention, like it must not be that hard to kind of get rid of your past as a game developer. So rebranding, I guess it doesn't hurt that much. It might be a little costly, but
and the whole issue of getting the copyright or licensing it for Friday the 13th is a very interesting one. And again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm pretty sure Rob is not a lawyer either, so we don't have too much to talk about there. And speaking about lawyers, it actually gives me a third legal related issue we can fit into this section. But I guess, like, with something like Friday the 13th, I guess even though they got the license for the copyright, because someone else is claiming ownership, I guess that means that they don't really have a leg to stand on. Is that right, or something along those lines?
Oh, gosh, I have no idea because this stuff. I know that copyright stuff is some of the just
Mm-hmm.
the tallest weeds in the world to wade through because so many people are involved. I mean, you've got the property owner, the person who came up with the concept.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got the studio who made the movie. Then you've got the actors, and you got the agents, and you've got
Mm-hmm.
the writers of the movie who are different from the people who created it. And then you've got all these sequels where all these different people are involved. And I don't know, like if it comes back all the way to the origin of the person who created the IP. I mean, I have no idea. It probably just winds up being someone gets a giant paycheck at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know how something like that is settled. And then when you have a game like this, it's just some kind of fringe element that no one's going to care about anymore. So yeah, they're probably dead in the water because who's going to fight for them? Probably nobody.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those very sticky issues because, again, fans don't really care about copyright. They care about the game that they spent. I think it was like $40 to purchase Friday the 13th to begin with, and with the promise of DLC and all that.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that continued development, again, who's going to stick around other than, the hardcore minority? But that's not how you build a game.
No, no, certainly a game that should already have a giant audience behind it. You basically just pissed them off, and they're never coming back. And yeah, you have all this money, but you're probably going to need it for lawsuits, probably.
And the real kicker, I think, what's gotten a lot of people very unhappy is that the original concept, this was not supposed to be Friday the 13th. Gun Media was working on a game that was kind of like Friday the 13th, and they figured, well, this is our chance. Let's partner with this IP. Let's do this licensing deal. And that will, of course, give us more notoriety. So if they would have kept with the original plan, none of this would have been happening. But again, would this have worked to begin with if they just did, unnamed horror game rather than Friday the 13th?
Yeah, and I wonder because this is one of those things. I feel like you should have all your ducks in a row before you do the Kickstarter, like your legal ducks in a row. I don't know how many people out there are familiar with Rift Tracks. They're kind of the the offshoot of Mystery Science Theater 3000. The cast at the end of that series run went about and made a new thing. So they go out and do Kickstarters frequently to get the rights to bad movies to riff on, and I am fairly certain that they make sure to go and get the approval of the person to say, well, okay, we'll let you do it if you give us this much money, and then they go to Kickstarter saying, hey, if we get this much money, we can riff this movie, so please, if you're interested, give it to us. So I feel like if you're going to do something with a game like that, definitely make sure you have access, because if something like this comes up, you need to have some kind of documentation around to like protect you a little bit. It sounds like they didn't. But again, not a lawyer. Speculation.
Yeah. And I think what this is, the fall of this, I think, is going to be really good for Dead by Daylight. That was the other game that's kind of horror themed, and I guess what's very interesting, they got characters like Freddy Krueger, Mike Myers as characters in the game after collaborations. And I'm just wondering if this means we're going to be seeing Jason Voorhees in Dead by Daylight in the coming months.
Yeah, I mean, and you got Mortal Kombat. They got, I think, was it Jason? No, was it Mike Myers or Jason that they got in
They
their game?
did get Jason in that one, as well as Freddy Krueger in the other one.
Gotcha. Because that was interesting to me when I saw that. And if they can get the rights, granted they're a giant company with a giant legal team, but chances are everything's set. Like if
they cross their T's and dot their I's.
Exactly. So if you get this guy who's going after the studio, like the Hollywood studio, or maybe it is the game studio, I don't know, but it's going to be a long-term legal battle during which the company's just going to be just fine adding new content.
what I'm thinking, again, I'm not a lawyer either. My thought is that from the news piece, the actual lawsuit began. Let me get that date one more time.
Real quick, is that on Steam, El Gordo? I'm going to add this to my wish list real quick. Sticks.
All right,
Terror Drone.
So the lawsuit began in 2016. The Kickstarter for Friday the 13th began in 2015. What I'm thinking what happened was when Gun Media approached, who owns the rights to Friday the 13th? Like, what's that name of that film company? I've seen so many movies from them. New Line Cinema, is that the ones who own Friday the 13th?
I don't know. Those properties tend to change hands so often, It's hard to tell.
Well, what I'm assuming is that they thought this will just be an open and shut thing. They already own the license. We'll just say we want, just give us a licensing for Friday the 13th, 1, 2, 3, very simple contract, we're done. They probably didn't put in any kind of stipulations or addendums, like what if there's an issue in the future or how things go forward. And apparently, I think this came back to bite them in a very big way. It reminds me of when I spoke with John Brieger. What was that? Okay. It reminds me when I spoke with John Brieger when we talked about licensing for tabletop games. But it's a very similar situation where you need to make sure everything is, signed and sealed on that contract, including what happens in the future. And that's a major point when it comes to video games, especially those who make use of any licensed content. Like we've talked about this before with Grand Theft Auto, Castle Illusion with Mickey Mouse, even the Marvel games like Deadpool, that X-Men Origins Wolverine game and stuff like that, where you can't just be thinking about what I'm doing in this game or how this game is being sold for 2 months. You need to be thinking about how this game's going to be sold in 2 to 10 years in the future, because this stuff will come back to haunt you.
Yeah, and I don't know who follows those trails. I don't envy the work that lawyers of property, like intellectual property, what they have to do, because you have to follow all of these strings. Like,
yep.
I just read up a few months ago on Atari and their licenses and properties and their ownership, and it's been like batted around for decades, and it's split into 2 different entities that are owned separately by different people, and it's just crazy. How do you deal with that?
Oh yeah,
like no idea.
And hey, Foreign, thanks for coming on as well. But yeah, it's again those issues where most game developers aren't really thinking about this stuff long term. Now, of course, if your game does well, you assume that gives you more of a leg to stand on in the future. But then, as we've seen, or actually, wow, lots of legal issues I'm just now remembering that are popping over this section. Farsight Studios licensing for the tables by, oh no, I forget which company it was. Thankfully, Steam is only a browser away here. But they're licensing for about, I think, 63 or 64 of their most recognizable tables is ending the end of June. And despite the acclaim from Farsight and how much people like that, the company is refusing to renegotiate or extend that licensing agreement. And because of that, it means those tables are going to go away. Now, in this case, Farsight has been transparent for years, saying that there is a chance that these tables are going to go and we may not be able to get them back. But it still hurts these kinds of games. Because, again, for someone who knew who's going to be coming in, let's say July 1st, they're never going to be able to get access to those tables again unless something changes in the future.
Yeah, it really is. It's squirrely. You're going to have Colin on again to talk about the legal stuff, because I'm sure he's knee-deep in that stuff, that Patreon.
Yeah, and I forget who I spoke to about this, but like GOG, their copyright lawyers, they must be pulling their hair out on a day-to-day basis, dealing with all the different games on there.
Yeah, and again, back in the 80s, when you had solo developers and they had to like the whole publishing process was so much weirder because of the physical media you had to deal with. I'm sure it's actually weirder now because it's so splintered, but um, when you have these people who made this content and submits it, like you don't know who the original creator is, and if the person who submitted the game is actually different, like, and then out of nowhere you have this person saying, hey, I made that game and here's all the proof. Yeah, what happens? Like, all I can think of is like Devolver, right? They seem to get their initial influx of cash as a publisher, having acquired the rights to make to expand the Serious Sam franchise, and that having that IP available to you. But what if someone comes up and says, hey, I own Serious Sam, I don't know where you got the rights to do this, but I disagree. Like, what happens to Devolver? Do they have to give up all their money because their success is based on this game, or how does that work?
Yeah. Again, you just don't know. Or you assume that the developers had a really good lawyer draw up that contract. And again, it's one thing that I think a lot of game developers, especially like smaller ones, they're not thinking about this stuff. And it can become a very big issue when you use any kind of licensing in your games. And I just looked up Pinball Arcade, so it's Williams and Bali. Those tables are going on. Those are some of the most recognizable pinball tables ever made.
Yeah.
So they're in some big trouble in terms of trying to get that appeal. And it's a very sticky situation for everyone involved. Like, GOG has gone on record. They have taken games off of their service because they can no longer be sold. But they will tell you usually weeks, if not a few months in advance, to say, this game we don't have the licensing for it. If you want it, get it now. And they will sometimes even put those games on sale just to give people a chance of owning them.
Yeah.
But again, it's still a lose-lose for the company and for the consumers.
Yeah. Like, in my brain, I'm just thinking, what is Williams thinking? Are they going to roll out new editions of the pinball machines? Because how does that make any money?
Yeah.
This is like a major revenue stream. Unless you have another party that's willing to make the digital versions, that's giving you more money, then what's the upside?
Yeah. And that's always that very weird point there, Rob, that, like, what's your end game for for not keeping this licensing going? I'm assuming Farsight is still paying Williams and Bali for these tables, or there's got to be some kind of ongoing funding for it. I mean, I can't imagine them saying, here are the licensing, you don't have to pay us anything anymore. So it just seems like easy money. But I forget who I spoke to about this, but chances are what they're arguing about is that either they want more money, or they saw how popular they were and they may want to try and develop their own digital game. And again, it's one of those things that's just very unless we're actually there, we're not going to be able to look at this deeply.
Yeah. This is purely from the fan perspective, the armchair quarterback of things. Because fortunately, I've never had to deal with any legal troubles that great. So.
But so that's 2 down. There's still 2 more legal issues that are going on right now that we can talk about for this section.
Let's do it.
So number 3 has to do with the mobile game from Westworld, or based on that HBO show. I haven't really watched it. Have you?
I haven't. It's definitely in my. I loved the old movie. I did. I thought it was great, and so I'm very interested. I know they've obviously taken that concept and ran with it, but I'm very interested. So one of these days, it's too much content out there. It's too much.
So, for those of you who are interested in checking out the Westworld game, apparently it's going to be in some trouble. So it was announced this week that Bethesda is filing a lawsuit against Warner Brothers and Behavior Interactive, they're the developers of the Westworld game, on apparently copyright infringement Let's see, we get all the lovely terms: misappropriation of trade secrets, deceptive business practices, and unfair competition. Whew. So what they're alleging is that Behavior Studios has stolen or is copying Bethesda's game Fallout Shelter, which I'm sure a lot of people have played or at least know of at this point. That came, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. It was incidentally announced at one of the E3 shows. So normally a story like this devolves into he said, she said kind of territory. But there's a very interesting twist, and this is a very funny one. Apparently, what has clued Bethesda in on the fact that Behavior is stolen code is, as it's been reported, there is a bug in Westworld that was a bug that was in the original version of Fallout Shelter. Exactly, like the same exact thing. And that's what they're kind of basing their court case on. Oh, here it is. The Fallout Shelter was released in 2015. So originally, Behavior Interactive was contracted by Bethesda to work on the Fallout Shelter game. And let's see. However, once the contract was done, that original development, the contract stated that Bethesda claimed ownership over all the work that Behavior did, including code designs, artwork, layouts, and other assets and materials. So basically, the entire blueprint and structure for the game was owned by Bethesda.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I was really, the way I heard about it was I was overhearing some colleagues talking about it, and I had that same train of thought. I was like, well, how are they going to prove this? Historically, this is just an empty threat. But then they said, oh, well, a similar bug was found. And I'm just like, oh, well, that's kind of open and shut. Famously, Microsoft had that same kind of thing happen to them with DOS way, way back, in actually having the guys who created the code, his signature still in the code. But, like, I want to know, more than anything, I want to know how they found that the bug was there. And I just imagine some person, someone who like worked in QA and knew these bugs very closely, being like, wait a second, this is identical. I bet there's this bug. Yep, there it is. And then they go report it to the company. I just want to see that chain of events. I think that's funny, because there's no way that the lawyers or anyone up at that level saw this game and they're like, okay, well, this is similar, but what are we going to do? And they're like, well, there's this bug. And it also makes me wonder if publishers now are going to be like, well, no, let's keep that bug in there just in case someone rips us off. Oh, God, that's so funny.
Yeah. And again, as you say, Rob, it's a very sticky situation when we're talking about games ripping off of other titles. Because, as we've talked about, you legally cannot copyright game mechanics. Nobody owns the Farmville style build whatever, or nobody owns this kind of design. But when we start looking at specific elements that are indicative, that can be a very interesting case. Now, of course, the whole thing with PUBG and suing that cloner because of the frying pan, that's a little bit hard to, take a bite out of there. But again, it's one of those issues we run into when developers are trying to copy or chase after the next big thing.
Yeah, it is a shortcut, and I feel like, again, I don't know all the ins and outs, and I'm sure that this third party, I just got to assume that they did it all in the best of, with the best of intentions, and maybe we're just foolish in thinking that they could do this. But it is something you can't do when you're hired to do a job. That job is separate from any other job you've done. Now, certainly you draw inspiration and experience from having done a similar title.
Yeah.
But you should look at it as, I don't even know if you can look at it as a sequel, because you can't use that same exact engine. You have to make another one. And you should have learned all your lessons from that first one, and you can make it better. But my assumption would be that they try to treat it like a sequel and just, take the original engine and build upon it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I wish I knew more. It's one of those things I think only a few people are ever going to know the full story, but it's
Mm-hmm.
probably very interesting.
Yep. And it's not going to get any easier for behavior here because that's going to really come back to bite them. Yes or no if this lawsuit sticks. That's another, like as we talk about with gun media. You know, when you get, that's the double-edged sword of working in this game industry. You do really well, it's going to carry you forward in your next project. You do something bad or murky or something doesn't work for you, you now have that black stain on your permanent record that people will be bringing up on forums for whenever you announce your next game.
Well, I don't know what's worse, having pissed off some fans, or you have legal problems that could potentially cost people millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Like a company might hire someone who's had trouble keeping a fan base, but or pissing off their fans. But who's going to hire you when you've cheated, or perceptively, when you've cheated and had a successful lawsuit brought against not just you but another major company that hired you? Like, how do you put, like, have that on your resume and expect to get another job?
Mm-hmm. Especially with companies, they will look into your previous work. There's no doubt about that. And again, like as you said, Rob, the whole idea of them just taking what they did before and then thinking that they can do it again, or just copying their own work. This goes back to, again, the whole thing with reading and making sure you understand these contracts. I mean, as a very small example there, when I was getting ready to sign the contract for the book deal, I made sure to look that over. I had like 5 or 10 different people read that over with me to find out about every little part of that. And you gotta do that. I mean, again, you can always go on good faith, that you assume everything will be nice and everybody will be able to be accommodating. But the whole point of a contract is to protect everybody when it doesn't, or when that
Yeah.
falls out.
Yeah, the whole good faith thing, it sounds great, and it can be great if it works out. But if
Mm-hmm.
that the moment it doesn't work out, boy, I can't imagine something messier.
Oh, yes. And when it gets messy, it can lead to a lot of problems. Now, speaking of which, now with regards to the Westworld game, it's still too early to tell, but I'm going to assume that for those of you who really want to play that game, you may want to download that off of the iOS or Google Play Store sooner than later.
Well, I mean, if it's like Fallout Shelter, downloading it now, and you'll get your fix in a brief period of time before it's just the server goes down and you can't do anything.
Mm-hmm. But speaking about long-term issues that come back to bite you, there's one more bit of news regarding, I guess, this kind of legal battle section of our show. And that has to do with the ongoing lawsuit between Fred Ford and Paul Ritchie regarding the Star Control IP ownership and their bout with Stardock Entertainment. So it seems like things are getting worse and worse regarding this lawsuit. So it was announced this week on their website that they're opening up. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Let's see. Where is it? Here it is. It was announced this week that in order to keep going with the lawsuit between them and Stardock, that they've set up a GoFundMe for legal battle, for the legal funds. And do you want to guess how much money they're asking for?
I don't. I don't want to guess at all.
Alright, well, it's a good thing you're sitting down, Rob, for this. They're asking for $2 million in terms of the legal fund for it.
God, that's just wrong. I'm sorry. It's like, wait, we pay for your game, and now you want us to pay for your legal troubles? Yeah, listen, Star Citizen, that's a good one. the funny thing is about GoFundMe, it's like I can think of a million different things that would be more worthwhile putting my money in, because
Mm-hmm.
just recently there's a guy near where I live who's just doing cleanup of the parks and stuff and
Mm-hmm.
then the roads just by himself, and he has a GoFundMe that asks for $100,000, and I'm like, that's way more worthwhile. This guy's taking time out of his life, and he's dedicating time to cleaning up everything where
Mm-hmm.
nobody else is.
Yeah.
And now you got someone who wants you to pay for their legal battles.
Yeah. And they've raised just under $8,000 since they put up yesterday. But again, it's feels very skeevy, and that's coming from someone who loves Star Control. Now, the idea, of course, that even though they own Toys for Bob, and that's a company that makes Skylanders, and of course that has earned lots and lots of money, that's you can't use your company to pay for your own personal legal fees. It doesn't work like that, and that'll put them probably even more behind the eight ball. But
Right.
it's definitely a case of of who's the real bad guy here. Like, because a lot of people do not like Stardock due to Brad Wardell, and getting more into that would take us into some what's the term? I guess dirty laundry that I don't really want to go into, but it's definitely a case of probably a lot of people aren't going to be happy with Stardock when this is all said and done. And Stardock, of course, has their own Star Control game being worked on. And getting back to what we were saying with Friday the 13th and the other ones, the whole issue is that Stardock thought that they bought the rights to Star Control when they took over Infogames, I always forget their name, which was originally bought by Atari. But apparently, despite them saying that they did own the rights to it, Paul and Fred still have the original IP. They own the name, they own all the characters, the races, the ships, and stuff like that. And Stardock has been pursuing them to get that copyright. Because again, naming your own original characters in it is not the same as having those same characters and stories and stuff that was in the original Star Control. And they've been refusing it for these last few years. And apparently it is getting more and more bad here. Let me see. I'm trying to read through it while I'm talking. Let's see. So 2013 they approached them after a bankruptcy auction. That's when they got the assets for Star Control, but not the games or the creative work. And to add more fuel to the fire, Stardock has been trying to claim for months now that Paul and Fred aren't the original creators of Star
Oh
Control.
my God.
So, like, for my, like, again, as a fly on the wall or as an outside observer, it's sounding like Stardock is pulling some very skeevy crap, and it's forcing Paul and Fred to kind of do their own, in a sense, with this whole lawsuit and the legal fees.
And I got it for Draco in there. Do they really need the IP? That's a good question at this point,
Mm-hmm.
because yeah, IP is very strong.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have something that everybody knows and loves, and suddenly you've got an audience where you didn't have to do any effort at all except pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, like that information is out there, and people are knowing this battle. They're already building ill will towards them. So when they do, assuming they get it, and they manage to launch
Mm-hmm.
another Star Control game that has all this original stuff, I mean, it's already got a blight on it. So at what point does the IP, this chase,
Become
stop being worth it?
it becomes toxic, essentially.
Yeah.
Eh. And again,
Even for the original creators, like let's say that they win. What
mm-hmm.
do they win? Like, are they able to ever release one again and still have that fan base, like, trust them? That's a question for you, Josh, because at what point do
Yeah,
you start to lose interest?
exactly. And it's tough because again, they're claiming they're on the right, and it sounds like they are, but at the same breath, it's like $2 million that they're asking for, and I just don't know here.
Yeah.
And
So what are you
let's
paying for?
Yeah.
Like, let's say they get the $2 million and they win the court case. Well, did you get a game out of it?
No.
Exactly.
No, definitely not. Because again, they're not even at the point of anything with their Ghost of the Precursors game. I mean, when I spoke with Fred and Paul last year, or it was maybe in early 2018, they're still like at like the pre-prototype. They're still like writing down what they want this game to be. Like, if this lawsuit does go perfectly for Fred and Paul, everything works for them, what do the fans have to show for it? Nothing. There's no game being developed right now. Now, could this game work and be the dream Star Control game we all wanted? Yes. Could it be a Star Citizen potential flop in the future? It could be that as well. And there's just nothing really concrete for fans to put their hands on other than Stardock's game. But
right.
I mean, who's going to really want to play a game like this when this is all said and done?
Well, and there's also like, okay, the $2 million, they get it, and then the legal case keeps going on for how long? And then once that's over, then they're going to ask for money for the game, and because they're not going to have money after the lawsuit, right? So unless they countersue, and so they're going to ask for more money for a game, and then you're going to have to wait several years for that game to come out. So we're 6 years down the line. We might have a new game. We might not. It might be good. It might not. Like, that's just, it's a lot of uncertainty to be asking for your legal battles to be paid for by the fans.
Yeah. And it's just a very tough situation because, again, a lot of people don't like Stardock to begin with, so they're naturally going to side with the developers of the original game. But it kind of feels like they're using that fandom as a shield there. Oh, did I lose you for a second?
Just for a second. I missed what you said. Fans of the game, and then shield. That's all I heard.
Like, the whole idea is like they're kind of using their fans as the shield for Star Control. Now, again, your fans are going to be your biggest supporters, but how far does that really apply? Like, again, with Star Citizen, they have people who have spent, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on that game.
Yeah.
Did they get what they were did they get what they were paid for? Again, they may say yes, but what does that mean for everyone else involved?
Yeah, and I agree. I would take the money and just give away the rights, because at a certain point, it's a losing battle, and you might as well let someone else lose that battle, and you just take the money and make something else nice, and create more goodwill amongst your fans, and or you could, like, there's any number of ways this could play out. Chances are it's gonna end with bitter resentment from somebody, and it's just gonna be ugly. It just seems like that's the path it's on.
But I think with that, we have 4 issues we've talked about, and none of them are really having any solutions right now. So